Welcome everyone. Good morning, evening and afternoon. Today is Saturday. We are in the middle of the weekend, and what we are doing this weekend is coming up with a whole list of tips, a whole list of suggestions and help to improve your experience in the dungeons of Season 4. We have a new set of dungeons, which of course means many players have to learn the mechanics, they have to learn the bosses. Not everyone, after all, played in BFA or Legion or Warlords and had to deal with these type of dungeons. You know, sometimes maybe even current Shadowlands dungeons, maybe even sometimes you learn something new about Spires of Ascension that you haven't learned in a year of Shadowlands, or maybe some new skip in the other side that you haven't heard of or seen in several months. So imagine how many things you can learn about these dungeons like Grimrail Depot or Iron Docks that you haven't really seen in several years, or maybe you haven't even ever played. How many things you can learn about these dungeons. So for today we're going to take a look at the tips and the tricks and the suggestions for you to have a smoother time in the dungeons, and we are starting for today with the Mechagon dungeons, Workshop and Junkyard, mostly because they have been the most run of the older dungeons. So let's go and take a look at the amount of things you can have to smoothen your experience in these two dungeons. Starting of course with how you would start normally your Mechagon dungeon, which is in the Junkyard, the first part of the dungeon. Starting with the side which is normally the more commonly used side to start the dungeons in, which is the left side, the Gunker side, the slime side of the dungeon. Number one, as a help to all of you range DPS sleeping whenever you pull the slime elementals, they have one very dangerous ability. There is one shotty ability in those packs, which is the Slime Wave, which is an uninterruptible cast where the slime elemental will turn towards a ranged character and then charge. At high keys, especially this week in Fortified, it can amount to a one-shot. So one very nice thing you can do here is be a hunter and drop a frost trap in front of your ranged players. Even if you are a survival hunter, since you are the popular guy nowadays, you can, every time you pull a pack with a slime elemental, drop behind you towards the ranged players, drop a frost trap, so that when the slime elemental is going to charge, he's just gonna get stuck in the frost trap and deal no damage, which is certainly better than risking one of your sleeping ranged players to get one shot. One tip which is going to work for several mechanics is of course warriors and their spell reflect. In this case we are talking about the slime part of Junkyard, so warriors can spell reflect the toxic monstrosities consume, and it's not only good because you don't have to move out, it's also good because it's gonna do a whole bunch of damage to the mob himself, which is also quite beefy. It has quite a lot of HP to chunk through, so spell reflect can do some work as a warrior. One thing that perhaps range DPS or healers are too scared to try is that during the fight of Gunker, so during the fight of the slime boss, you can actually stay at max range as a ranged player. You can essentially ignore his coalesce suck-in mechanic and his toxic wave mechanics by simply staying out of range. Those mechanics will stop at 30 yards, I believe, and you will not really have to bother with them. You will only have to dodge the swirlies that get constantly cast on the ground, but the two main mechanics of the boss you can basically ignore if you stay at your max range. For dispellers, if you actually don't want to ignore the mechanics, then what happens is that some of your squirt bots, the little robots helping you in the fight, can sometimes get trapped by the slimes. Well, you can actually dispel them. You might not know you can, because what you see in your frames is going to be the slime covering the bot. But if you have a macro where you are targeting the squirt bot himself, which is under the slime, you can actually dispel it and immediately remove the slime on top of it, so you don't need to waste damage breaking the bot away from the slime during the fight of Gunker. There are also going to be, much like for warriors and their spell reflect, there are going to be several tips for hunters and night elf players with Feign Death and Shadow Meld. Just take in mind that the vast majority of mechanics that will be targeted at you, so they're not going to be RNG, they're not going to be just casually targeting random players or maybe just targeting the ground. If the mob is targeting you with certain mechanics, you can Feign Death and ignore the ability itself. Like for example, one of the dangerous one of the most dangerous for trash mobs is the weaponized crawler's scrap cannon. So the mega hit that you take in Junkyard, that's one of the examples where you can just feign death and ignore the cast. As you move away from Gunker and you make your way to Trixie and Nano as the second boss fight, usually that's how you go in Junkyard, there is a cheat which is quite risky, but you can still try to do it. You can fight Trixie and Nano in the back of their platform where they are, towards the right from where you're looking at them. There's going to be a little hole in between the two buildings there where you can just drag them. Why would you want to drag them there? If you drag them there, Nano will not pick up his bike, which means he will not do his spinny one-shotty mechanic if you get hit by it. Obviously, the downside of doing this type of strategy is that when Trixie casts Megatase, which is the other one-shot mechanic, you won't be able to move out of that hole unless you risk Nano going back to pick up his bike. So you have to have some sort of immunities or very strong defensive to survive the Megatase. But still, from my experience, it's more likely that people just get caught by the bike and get one-shot rather than having trouble with the Megatase of Trixie. So that's a way for you to effectively ignore half of the mechanics of that fight. One of the juicy things you can do, not as a warrior with Spell Reflect, not as a hunter with Feign Death, but as a mage with Spell Steal. You can Spell Steal Enlarge, the mechanic that gives you 100% more health and damage. It's a very juicy mechanic. Of course, players like healers that want to dispel, purge, offensively dispel that mechanic, if you have a mage in your party, you can wait a couple of seconds just to see if the mage is aware that he can spell steal it, and then you can dispel it yourself if he's not spell stealing it himself. But as a mage, you should be aware whenever you are in trash packs with the Mechagon Renormalizer, which is the mob basically all around, all the way up to the last boss. Those are the guys that cast the Enlarge that you can spell steal. Another thing, which is class specific, but this one is going to be a little bit more relevant because it's about Warlocks, and as we know nowadays, Warlocks are quite popular in Mythic Plus. Warlock Gateway can work to skip most of your way up to the last boss by using gateways. By using the gateway, usually on the right side, around the Mechagnomes side, you can use a portal to skip a whole bunch of mobs, depending on which route you are taking. Now, about the last boss itself, the HK8 boss, there is going to be the gauntlet part, which can be quite confusing to some players. Now, a few things you should know about this gauntlet when you have to go up. As you get out of phase 1, as you defeat the first robot and you get to disable, to drain all of the energy from the tower, you can first of all jump over the rotating beams in the HK8 gauntlet. You don't have to walk along the free segment in between these beams. You can just jump over them, no problem. Even if you're a gnome, yes, even if you're small, you can still jump over these beams. Also, you can simply say fuck it and immune the entire way through. If you're a rogue, you can just sprint and cloak, you can just bubble and run all the way up, no problem as well. Now, this tower conduit used to have its own boss frame, so you could see the energy, so how close you were to draining it to zero. Now, for some reason, it doesn't anymore, so you have to left click on the tower itself to see the energy. Talking about the energy, while you are channeling and draining the energy, you can actually still cast. Now, this is not quite important for a warlock or a mage. It's not that you have to cast anything while you are draining energy. However, it's pretty good for healers. It is pretty good even for DPS specs with off-healing abilities like a druid, like a priest, or even a monk. You can still heal people as you are channeling the energy drain on the tower. Another good tip for this gauntlet part is for pet classes. It is better if you just place your pet, if you just let your pet down and have him wait for you down there, because of course the most important part of the entire boss fight is the burst damage you can do after you have drained all of the energy from the tower and you have the HK8 down on the ground, incapacitated. That's the moment where you want to do your most damage. So sending your pet alongside you up the tower, once you rush all the way down, your pet is actually going to be lagging behind, especially if you are, for example, talking about skips. If you are with a warlock who puts the gateway from the top of the tower all the way down in front of the boss, your pet will be lagging 5, 6, 7 seconds behind, which in the scope of the boss fight is quite a lot of time for you to lag behind with your pet. So keep it down, keep it in passive, keep it in stay, and let him be right next to the boss waiting for you to be done with the draining of the tower. Lastly, about this dungeon and about this last boss, talking about getting back for the burst phase in time, it's always good if you're a DPS to leave ahead of time. Once the energy you can see on the tower conduit is at 10, for example, is at 15, you can start to make your way in front of the boss and let the tank or let the healer finish the channeling, since they are going to have the least damage compared to the DPS. So the DPS can just be ready to pump the damage once the boss is vulnerable. Now, Junkyard is the one with the more amount of tips and tricks compared to Workshop. A lot of the stuff about Workshop is going to be about skipping and about ignoring certain things for certain classes and specs, but still, it's worth going over. First of all, there is a funny thing, there is a funny interaction with the Rocket Tank's Rocket Barrage, which makes your tank able to solo the entire first pack of the dungeon if your DPS and healer do not come down into the arena and just let the tank be in there and solo fight the entire first pack. Why? Because Rocket Tank's Barrage is going to target DPS players and healers all around the room, but if there is only the tank, if there's only one target, it means those rocket tanks are going to spawn some 20-something missile barrages on top of the tank, who is on top of the rest of the pack, and rocket barrage actually damages the mobs themselves as well. So it's pretty hilarious if you want to try it once or twice as a tank to see the results of this little cheese at the start of the dungeon. Much like Junkyard, there are of course plenty of mechanics in here where you can feign death, where you can shadow meld or even vanish to dodge the mechanic itself. You have the vent jets of the first boss, which is also quite nice if you're a melee to get out of the focus of the boss, because it makes it very hard for you to damage the tank, whereas if the vent jets is targeted as a healer, it is going to be much better. Same goes for things like Cujo. When Cujo is targeting you for the leap, you can once again feign death or shadow meld to completely cancel the leap. Talking about Cujo, there is also a pretty helpful weak aura to allow you to stay at the very edge of the box where you have to hide behind, while still being able to target him and still being able to do damage. This will show you when you are safe from the AoE but still in range, in line of sight to be able to damage the boss himself. Right before Cujo, however, but this is more well known, I'm assuming by now many people have learned this the hard way even, which is the slimes that blow up when you kill them. There are some very carefully placed pillars around the paths where these slimes are going to be. Those pillars are meant for you to hide behind, so that when the slimes blow up, you don't actually get killed and you take no damage, because the blow up of the slimes is affected by line of sight. So just hide when the slimes are blowing up. Another skip, which is not perhaps that important because once again the prevalence of warlocks in keys, is the skip across the ramp after Cujo, where you have to run all the way up the assembly line while also having to dodge the flame jets. Well, a warlock can literally just pop a portal all the way to the end of the entire gauntlet and be done with it. The same goes for warriors with leap, demon hunters with double jump, outlaw rogues with their grappling hook, or door of shadows as a ventier that can work the same way and can make you skip the entire gauntlet. This one is a little bit more of a cheesy cheese, where priests can use mind control on the tinkerers, because the tinkerers are going to have, even while mind controlled, their kamikaze summon squirrel ability, the one that sends a squirrel to blow up. And this does a whole lot of damage to trash, even as a mind control tinkerer, as a priest. So you can make use of it during the entire part after Cujo, where you have to deal with these mobs. You can use the tinkerers and mind control them. After the entire gauntlet and the stealth gauntlet, you end up on the Blastatron, the mecha mini mini-boss that has the capacitor discharge, the dance, where you have to avoid the glowy blue quadrant of the room and only stand in the safe spot. If you pull the Blastatron all the way to one side, you can actually stay at max range on the opposite side as a ranged DPS or a healer to not even have to dodge the capacitor discharge. It's just gonna be out of range of you. Very similar to the ganker fight in Junkyard by simply out of ranging the mechanic. A little cheat once again for ranged DPS. I'm afraid melee DPS are having it a little bit worse when it comes to cheesing mechanics. Ranged can stand on the stairs of the Machinist Garden fight to never have to worry about any of the gears spinning all across the room. Of course, there are still the rotating flame vents that you have to dodge, and you still have to focus the ad that spawns that might be out of range when you stay on the stairs, but just know that stairs equals safe spot for your gears dodging part of the fight. After the Machinist Garden fight, you can, as a reminder, go upstairs and fight the 2 spider tanks, but remember to kill the second spider tank first. Why? Because defeating the second spider tank is what enables the RP to have the mecha helicopter come down and allow you to go in the next platform of the dungeon. So defeat the second tank first and then the RP starts, and as the RP is on its way, you finish the first spider tank and then you're ready to go. Last of the worthwhile skips is yet another gateway skip to dodge the last pack, which is one of the more dangerous packs in the dungeon, with a gateway portal from Warlocks. And once again, on the last boss, it's a lot of feign that and shadow meld shenanigans, especially with the most dangerous of the mechanics of King Mechagon, which is the Gigazap. The triple Gigazap cast on 3 different players. What's even stronger is that if you use it on the first cast, so if you cancel the first cast of the 3 Gigazaps being cast by King Mechagon, it is also going to cancel the next 2 casts. It's going to be a net save of several 100,000 points worth of HP that your healer would have had to heal if 3 players were hit by Gigazap instead. So these have been all of the tips so far gathered for the 2 dungeons of Mechagon, Workshop and Junkyard. I hope some of you have found at the very least a few things to improve your stay in these 2 dungeons. Many of these things are going to be targeted at specs with several cheeses already in their kits, like Feign Death, like Shadow Meld, like immunities, for example. Those are always the ones that can have the best use in Mythic Plus keys in cheesing mechanics. So I'm hoping that several of the players, especially several of the Flavor of the Month rerollers, you know, chilling on survival, not making full use of their kit with traps, with Feign Death, can learn a few more things on how to utilize their class and their spec in Mythic Plus. But for today, for this Saturday, this was all. Tomorrow, I think it might be the video, the recap about the raid, maybe more dungeon tips and tricks. Next one is gonna be likely the Karazhan dungeons, which are currently the hardest ones. So perhaps it would be good to come up with a few tips and tricks on how to improve your stay in those 2 dungeons. But for the moment, we can stop here. Thank you, of course, as usual, as a round of applause to all of my Patreon supporters. It is a good help in what allows me to continue to give out and push out content for WoW, Shadowlands right now, Dragonflight eventually. For the moment, I am still the chieftain of the No Alpha tribe. Eventually, we will get into the beta, according to my sources, which is, trust me, bro, should be in about a couple of weeks. The beta should go live for Dragonflight, so content will be even more present, even more populated by Dragonflight stuff. And I'm pretty excited about that, and my Patreon supporters have a lot of credit for this. Also, as a continuation, you guys can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to this YouTube channel for further support. That would be appreciated. What would also be appreciated as a parasocial relationship addition would be to following me on Twitter right here, as well as subscribing to my Patreon at these 2 links. With all of this social shenanigans being done, we can now leave each other for real. I'm going to leave you to the rest of your weekend. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, it's frustrating. It's frustrating when you're hungry and you want to eat. You know you have to eat, but you kind of don't have anything that is stimulating your appetite in your fridge. That's quite annoying.